The biggest insight I've had from coaching is that people already know what they should do. They struggle with the emotional blockers to doing it. Most of the time, they have an inner knowing about what they should do or what they want to do. And there's some emotional cost to that thing. And so I built all of this grid of emotions and said, how can we use our emotions to then reveal something about our motivations that we didn't know previously? And that talk, I was so dumb at the time because I did not open to all the opportunity that came from it. But it had literally half of a room of 50 highly successful entrepreneurs crying at the same time. And I've never been so moved by a thing. And it was all because you asked me that question. Welcome back to Good Work, the long-form interview show about the inner journey of outward success. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks. On this show, I talk with talented creators, entrepreneurs, authors, artists, and athletes about what it really takes to become world-class and live a thoughtful life. These are not just the highlights, but the struggles, the doubts, and the personal growth that usually happen behind the scenes. These are conversations you can't hear anywhere else. Today's episode, well, it's a little different. After a year of interviewing some of the most thoughtful people I know, I wanted to turn the mic around and share a little bit more of my own story. So I asked my close friend and one of the world's best-selling authors, as well as the guest from episode 1, James Clear, to interview me about the inflection points, the inner work, and the ongoing questions that have shaped my life and continue to shape my life. We talk about the parts of my childhood I'm still learning from, why baseball was both an escape and a teacher, and how I'm learning to let go of old stories and be at peace with who I really am. You'll also hear about the frameworks I use in coaching, how I came to believe that the most successful people already know what to do. They just need help getting past the emotional blockers. And what it's looked like for me to finally stop believing that I need to suffer to do good in the world. This is the most personal conversation I've ever shared on the show, probably on any show, and I'm deeply grateful to James for holding it with so much care. Let's get to it.
Hello, I'm James Clear. Today, this is my show. I'm interviewing Barrett Brooks, normally host of the Barrett Brooks Show, and I'm excited to share some of the ideas and concepts that he's come across in his life and maybe tell a little bit of a deeper story and take you behind the scenes of the person who's usually hosting this with you. Barrett, I'm looking forward to this.
I've been looking forward to it too, James. It's a little bit odd to be on my own show as the guest, so we'll see how it goes.
You know, Barrett is not only the host of this show, he also is a coach and thought leader. He is someone who many of the top creators in the world are now trusting to come to for advice and for guidance as they try to build their businesses and build their brands. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I don't work with Barrett in a professional capacity, but I have known him in a personal capacity for a long time, over a decade now. I was at his wedding, making a fool of myself on the dance floor. He's a godfather to one of my sons. And so we've had a chance to get to know each other for many years now. And I'm honored that you gave me the chance to dive into this and do this interview together.
Yeah, grateful for it, man. Rich history there.
All right. So I don't like to bury the lead. Whenever I give an interview, I always try to deliver some value right away. So I want to share a really interesting insight that you passed along to me a couple years ago that I've thought about since and gone through since. And then I'm going to get your take on some other things. So you called it the things ending exercise when you told me about it at first. So it's this exercise that you can do really at any point in your life, but certainly at periods of transition or maybe the start of a new year, where you look at yourself and you basically ask, what am I letting go of? And so it could be a project or a relationship. It could be a role, it could be some season in your life, but you write down all the specific ways that that thing is ending and try to get very specific about it. And then you write down the obstacles, the things that are holding you back, the things that are preventing this thing from ending. What are you holding on to? What are you trying to maybe struggling to let go of? And if you want, symbolically, you can like write it all down and, I don't know, throw it in the trash can or throw it in the fire and watch it burn up. But I always remembered that exercise when you told me about it. And I love things like that, exercises that you can take yourself through to install a new belief or incite a new period of change. And I'm curious, given your background as a coach and the work that you've been doing with different creators and leaders and entrepreneurs, what some of your favorite exercises are or some of your favorite questions are to provoke that type of thought or growth.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That partially comes from a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is about grief and loss. And all the ways in which that shows up in our lives outside of death, because that's the context we always talk about grief and loss in, right? As we lose someone we love, or we are passing away from this earth, or whatever it might be. And the reality is that we experience loss and change and endings all the time. So it's a really powerful one. I love that one. And I literally just went through it with a client yesterday. Their role within their firm is changing in a massive way. And they were really struggling with the emotions of it, of like, I don't know what's going on with me right now. And what I offered to them was, well, things are ending and changing concretely right now. And your role is not as it used to be within your company. And I'm just not sure that you've acknowledged that yet. And so we went through this whole process of naming all the ways it was changing, naming all the ways they will need to change their behavior in the process. But there's an important part of this one that I'll highlight before I go on to others, which is, it's not just what am I letting go of? It is what is ready to be let go of. And sometimes there are things that we want to let go of with all of our hearts, and they're just not ready. And there's this real dance. And this is where having a partner, having a community of support around this stuff can be useful, is knowing what truly is ready to move and what you're ready to move on from, or move beyond, really is a good way of putting it. And so much of my work is that. There are these 3 channels that we tap into. Well, honestly, that we don't tap into. There are 3 channels, and 2 of them we often don't tap into. So I think of them as cognition, so the mind; emotion, could call it the heart; and what Anne-Laure Lecompte, neuroscience PhD, who was on the show, called it interoception. I call it somatic awareness, but interoception, just to give us 3 words with ION on the end. So cognition, emotion, and interoception. And no one will be surprised to hear that we spend most of our time in cognition. When we think about mental models, strategic thinking, ways of showing up at work and in the world, like, we use our minds because they are beautiful and they are helpful. Also, our minds are not sufficient. How many people do we know that know what they should do? Your whole body of work, we could say, is about knowing what you should do and why the hell we don't do it despite that fact. And this is where the other channels come in. And so the emotion piece is really about, what are you truly feeling here? And just acknowledging it, not to say getting lost in our feelings and doing all this stuff to get stuck. But a lot of times we are stuck because we're not acknowledging it. We're trying to think our way through a thing that is inherently emotional. And then the third layer being interoception, or somatic awareness, which is our body gives us about 90% of the data that we're taking in at any given moment in time. And we're not cognitively aware of this at any given moment. That would not be helpful to us. It's like the more base layers of the brain that are processing what's going on with the soles of my feet. How are my hands moving? Is my heart beating? Am I breathing? However, when we're not aware of it, it means that we're also not able to use it and work with it. And so there are times when it's helpful to start to tap in and notice, what are all the ways my body is responding to this moment in time? And so, like, I could notice when I sat down with you, okay, I feel free because I know you're my friend and you will hold this conversation carefully. But also I feel a little tense because I'm like kind of excited, and it's different to be in this seat versus the other seat on my own show. And beginning to build this interoceptive or somatic awareness gives us a new way of working with all the data we're taking in. And so, Daniel Kahneman has talked a lot about this, about the systems that turn on. And system one, the like more intuitive piece, is really about how information moves from body to emotion to mind. And system 2 is, how do we go to our mind and allow it to process with all of our abilities, all of the information we're taking in. And so one of the biggest exercises, to come back to your question, this is all preface to say that one of the biggest exercises, honestly, is helping extremely intelligent people who have had very high levels of success, asking something as simple as, what do you notice in your body right now as you're talking about X, Y, or Z, taking on that sponsorship deal, doing that talk for $100,000 next week, whatever it might be, and using that as a new source of data for why it is that you might be resisting this thing, or why it is that you might be moving towards it without knowing, so that we can start to unpack, well, where does that come from? Why is your body reacting that way? What does that tell you about your emotional relationship to this? And therefore, how should that inform your strategy? It's not that we detach from the brain, it's that we come back to it with a new set of data, including all of these other sources. So that's a big one. And then the last one I'll give you is, you asked me this question a long time ago, and I remember being slightly irritated by it.
It's the perfect question to start this interview with.
What are the 3 or 4 exercises that have been most impactful? And I think I said something like, it doesn't work that way. And then partially because I value our friendship, but partially also because it's been a skill I've begun to build, I said, okay, well, what if it were true that I really could give people exercises they could do on their own? How would I approach that? And if we take all of that stuff that I just talked about, what I realized was the biggest insight I've had from coaching is that people already know what they should do. They struggle with the emotional blockers to doing it. Most of the time, they have an inner knowing about what they should do or what they want to do. And there's some emotional cost to that thing. And I said, all right, I'm going to go take Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart, and I'm going to pick, I don't know what it was, a dozen or 16 of the most common emotional blocks that I see entrepreneurs have. And then I'm going to come up with categories of these, and we're going to do exercises related to them. So an example of a category was they ended up all being C's. An example of one of the categories was comparison. And so this is jealousy, resentment, envy, and looking at these different angles of how we can relate our own experience of life to someone else's and what we think is going on for them relative to what we think is going on for us. And created this exercise that was, well, what if jealousy or envy, which are different flavors of a similar emotion, what if that is actually trying to teach us something? What if it's not inherently bad, which is why we tend to reject it, but it's there because it is a signal that something is important to us. And so the coaching exercise becomes, number one, can we acknowledge the jealousy, envy, or resentment? And number two, can we then flip it and say, if I am jealous of James for having sold 20 million copies of his book, what does that reveal about what I really want from my life? And if I did that exercise and I really leaned into that, I don't feel jealous of you. I feel grateful for you and I feel abundance at how much success you've had. But if I did, the version of it that I would feel is, well, I've always wanted to be a writer. I am a writer, but I've never translated my writing into a publishable work that has then met a wide audience to some acclaim. Oh, okay. Well, actually, maybe this is highlighting my own ambition for myself. And perhaps underneath that, to tie it into your work, there are habits missing for taking this desire that I have that's represented by what you've achieved and then going and building that into a habit where I can actually deliver on that over time. And so I built all of this grid of emotions like this, pulling inspiration from Brene Brown's work, pulling inspiration from Dick Schwartz and his internal family systems work, and said, how can we use our emotions to then reveal something about our motivations that we didn't know previously? And that talk, I was so dumb at the time because I did not open to all the opportunity that came from it. But it had literally half of a room of 50 highly successful entrepreneurs crying at the same time. And I've never been so moved by a thing. And it was all because you asked me that question.
Well, there we go. Congratulations. I ask people questions, they end up crying. All right. So a couple things you said that stuck out to me there. First was this idea that some things are not ready to be let go of yet, or maybe other things are, but we haven't acknowledged it. I remember watching this interview with Steve Jobs many years ago where they were talking about Apple adding some new port or technology or something. I think actually it was when they decided to no longer support Flash on their, on their devices. They said, why are you doing this? So many people use this technology. And he said, we try to look at things as seasons, and some technologies are in their spring and their summer, and others are in their fall and winter. And we want our devices, we want our projects to be in their spring and summer. And when things are in their fall and winter, we're no longer interested in, pursuing projects like that. I always thought that was an interesting frame for your own life. What projects do you have right now, or what priorities or responsibilities do you have that are maybe entering their fall or winter? And then what other things are in this really hopeful early season of spring or summer? What does that tell you about where you should be directing your energy and attention? That was the first thing you made me think of. Second thing is this idea of interoception, or some of these other ways of recognizing our lives and what's going on that we aren't usually thinking about. She's an investor at Benchmark. I can't remember her name, Sarah Tavel, I think. She said basically investing is all about having an accurate view of the current reality. Everybody thinks it's about predicting the future. It's not actually about predicting the future. It's about seeing clearly what is happening right now. And the person who can actually see that best and be in the moment best is in the best position to make a good investment. And I think you could say that not just about business investments, but also about investments in your own personal life. The person who is actually self-aware. Self-awareness, I would love to get your take on this. Self-awareness is so critical, but it's very odd because everyone thinks they have it. You will never meet a person who says, yeah, I'm not really very self-aware. And yet there are obviously widely different levels of self-awareness that people have. And I think that leads to widely different decisions. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on self-awareness and what you've seen coaching people and how critical it is or isn't for the growth process. And I don't know, just kind of anything that sparks there for you.
So George Leonard in his book, Mastery, number one, it's a wonderful book and it's very short. It's just a great read. And one part of it, he's talking about, I think, Aikido, which is a martial art. And he's telling the story of these two black belt karate students who come into the Aikido studio and are learning this new art form. They're both masters at karate. So they're coming from a similar background. And one comes in very much with beginner's mind and approaches every move as if it's new, despite all of his background in a similar art form. The other comes in and has all of these assumptions built in of, I know how to do all of this basic stuff. I will be able to go faster. And the essence of the story is essentially that no matter how deep you have gone, there's always something new to be learned from the fundamentals of anything. And that the true path to mastery is not saying, I've already mastered that move, therefore I don't need to do it today. It's saying, since I know that move, it's probably worth me practicing repeatedly, perhaps even for hours, to see what new I can learn from it. And I think self-awareness is very similar. That my experience has been every time I think I have understanding about myself, it's like that understanding leads to a new door that opens that is a whole layer of depth beyond what I thought was there on the same exact piece of me. And if I go slightly psychologist for a moment, like Freudian on this, just biologically, or our neurobiology gets shaped by our environment, right? We have stimuli that we respond to when we're tiny, starting when we're a baby, all the way up through adolescence, when we begin to have fully formed personalities. And all of these experiences combined with our genes create behavioral patterns. They create ways that we interact with the world that begin with just trying to survive. How do I make sure that I get the food and nourishment that I need so that I don't die as a little tiny human? And then it becomes so that I'm socially accepted, so that I get love and belonging, and we build all these layers of stuff. This is normal. This is where some of the discourse on trauma comes from. But the thing is, even when we have no traumatic experiences, we're still shaped by the environment that we're in, both positive and negative experiences, right? It's like when a caveman ate a berry and it killed him, everyone around the caveman was like, I'm never eating a blue berry again, or a red berry or whatever. And maybe that's a traumatic experience, but it may not be. It may just be like, I'm not doing that again. And so much of self-awareness to me and in the work that I do with clients is, look, if you're good with your life, fine. You don't need to do anything if you're happy with your life and you think everything's going great. My experience, though, with clients is that they usually come to me saying, everything appears to be great, because this is the tier of people that I work with. They're often wealthy. They have had great success in some way. Perhaps they have millions of social media followers or email subscribers. Like, objectively, things are good. But the feeling of that thing is not what they thought it would be. And usually what I notice is the connection between these things is they have not yet become fully aware of all of the ways that these old patterns are still shaping their behavior despite the changed circumstances on the external or in the external world. And so if you are still behaving, as an example, if you grew up in the absence of money, perhaps even really your family having to work hard to get food on the table, but now you make millions of dollars a year. If your behavioral patterns are causing you to respond to opportunity from a place of scarcity and trying, quote unquote, trying to put food on the table, even though you have millions of dollars in the bank, your experience is the exact same as if you were poor. But what everyone thinks is that it should be completely different. And so what self-awareness is building the capability to see the ways in which our patterns are showing up in our lives, and then making active choice about whether that's how we want to continue to be. And so much of my work is about helping people not just see, but then have tools to reshape that in the moment and say, there's that thing I'm doing. When a speaking gig comes my way, I respond with, oh my God, I better say yes right now so that I don't lose the opportunity. And instead saying, I just told my coach Barrett last week that I hate speaking and I never want to do it again. And my business will not change at all if I say no to the next 10 opportunities. And therefore, what do I want to do with this thing that just came in? And that sounds so simple, but that will change your life to go from got to say yes right now to there is space and time and I actually don't need this. And let me think about it before I engage with it.
Yeah. The way I always think about it is like, of the universe of options, the various ways that you could have been raised or could have learned how to handle various things, money in this example, but if there are many, kind of an infinite list. What are the odds that the way you learned it the first time is the optimal way? It's basically, mathematically speaking, it's basically impossible that, the way that you first learned it is the ideal way to do it. So, once you become an adult and you walk into, grown up life, you realize, oh, this is now my responsibility to figure out a better way to do this or a better way to manage those feelings and responses and situations. Sometimes it requires practicing something uncomfortable, like what you just said, but, you have to try something different if you want to get something different. Okay, one of our objectives today is to try to give your audience a better understanding of you as a person and a little bit more about your story. So I think we've talked a little bit about some offline about some of the inflection points that you've had throughout your early years. One that I want to hear more about is the discovery program. And so maybe you can just maybe walk us through a little bit the early years kind of leading up to that and what your kind of initial life story was. And then talk a little bit more about the discovery program and what specifically was meaningful to you about that and why that was kind of an important early moment for you.
So I've done many forms of building my own self-awareness and understanding my own story and patterns and how I got shaped. And a big part of that has been looking back at my early life from my present day self and saying, like, how would I assess myself as a 7-year-old in first grade or whatever? And one of the things that I've come to is realizing that I was kind of awesome. Like if I think about what I would want in a kid, I was a lot of those things. I was athletic, I was curious, I was relatively smart. I took responsibility for myself very early on. Like I had a lot of traits that I want my kids to have. There was something in that was really generative for me of recognizing in myself that from a very early stage, I was already made of a lot of the things that I admire in others. And that might sound a little conceited, but it's actually a very healing process to realize that. For me, one of my big hangups or habits over the years is being not enough, or in harsh language, being a piece of shit in my mind. But this is inherently not true. And so the early life thing and being able to reshape my story around that centered on realizing how cool I was as a little kid and just like really embracing that about myself, that is in me still today. And part of that was just from an early age, I was extremely curious and tested.
It's interesting to hear you say, people listening to this won't have the context that you and I have had in all the conversations we've had over the years, but it's interesting to hear you say, because this concept of, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more, feeling like you're not enough or just having, these various negative thoughts, and then looking back and seeing, actually, I was everything I needed to be at that time. And sometimes I think growth is not like teaching yourself that you need to become someone different, but actually returning to who you previously already were. Like you didn't need to be anything new. You just needed to remember who you already were. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about that growth process. I'm curious how long that took for you to get
forever.
Yeah.
I'm still on it.
Still
and we'll continue to come back to that narrative. I'll just say that recording today is really special to me because I feel like last week was a big breakthrough for me that has really let me settle fully into a thing that I had been on the path of for a long time, of really letting those stories go. And, Michelangelo has that, or he is attributed with the quote about letting the sculpture reveal itself through the stone, that his job was just to chip away at everything that didn't belong there until the essential essence of this piece of stone was revealed through the sculpture that remained. And I think a lot about that, of becoming the leader we were made to be, the human we were made to be, the man, the woman, the whatever. And for me, that's definitely been true. It's actually just been removing all of these layers of cruft and stuff that's built up over the years, stories that aren't mine to own, stuff that I took on as mine, and just letting myself be me as I naturally am, and really fully embracing that has allowed so much opportunity to flow to me instead of me grasping at stuff that I'm scared I'm going to lose or whatever it might be. So to come back to the discovery program. So this was the gifted program in DeKalb County schools outside or as part of Atlanta, where I grew up. And, they did all the testing back then. I think it was called like ITBS, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, was like the essential measure of intelligence at the time, or academic aptitude, I guess might be the more appropriate way to put it. And I always tested really high, just from an early age, like just factually on standardized tests, the SAT that I started taking in 7th grade, IQ test, it was just always high. So fine, that is a fact. And that doesn't mean anything other than that it's a fact. But what that gave me access to is this discovery program. And discovery program was the first place where I felt like two things happened. I had lots of agency and I was really challenged. So it was no longer like, here's what we're learning today as a 25 person, first grade class or whatever, where I'd be kind of doodling in the back. It was, let's engage your very intelligent brain in things that are going to stretch you productively. And we're doing it in a group of maybe 5 people. And so, we could have a whole conversation about fairness and equity and all of that and whatever. I don't want to get into all that today. But for me at that time, that began to shape my desire to learn and my sense of what I might be capable of, because I saw that the more they revved my engine with stretchy stuff in discovery class. And examples of this would be like, we'd play Brain Quest, which was this game of like facts and quizzes, and we'd have the little buzzers, or we'd do tangrams that were like increasingly complex with taking the shapes and building them into the picture that was on the outline card, almost like brain game type stuff. It just was endless. It felt like they would just give me runway and I could go. And my whole life, especially my adult life, I felt like, until probably the past couple of years, I was like a sports car in traffic stuck in neutral, and I just could not let myself run. And I think back to that class and how that was one of the places I was able to run.
Man, I think those early wins are so important. It's interesting now, now we sit here as parents and I think about like our own kids coming up.
Oh yeah.
Those, the first ballet recital on some stupid little stage at the local elementary school, or, like whatever it is, it's easy to look at those small things and kind of, on the one hand, you don't want to be some crazy parent that acts like it's the end of the world if it doesn't go well. Like that's obviously not true. And on the other hand, you don't want to like totally dismiss it, because those early wins are critical. I feel like I could probably draw in my own little personal story an arc from maybe say 6th to 8th grade, somewhere around there, until like the end of college probably, but certainly through high school. And it was just like every year I had a few little wins, and they continued to mount. And by the time I got to be 22, I felt great about myself. And it was mostly because I just had that little stretch of these small things that now you look back on and you're like, this is kind of, a silly little thing. It wasn't as big as it felt in your head at the time, right? When you're 12, it feels like your whole world. But it is critical for building the essence of confidence. And I can see a little bit of that in kind of the way that you tell that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I know another kind of early inflection point was, well, first of all, we both have a background where baseball played a critical role in our lives, right? So that was kind of, I'm interested just to hear about the role that baseball played and the way you think about it now and how important it was or wasn't for you. But also the story of the Umpire Sportsmanship Award and kind of how the lesson learned there and how that impacted you.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit to baseball and then that specific inflection point. So baseball was a great escape for me. It was just where I went, where I felt like I was both naturally gifted at it, and also there was always something new to work at. I mean, I could take thousands of reps. Literally, my dad could hit me thousands of ground balls and I would not grow tired. I don't know how he didn't grow more tired. He must have had great patience with it. Baseball is a beautiful game. I don't always enjoy watching it to the degree that I did playing it or even coaching it. Actually, I've done a little bit of coaching of travel teams and stuff. And the strategy of baseball and the amount of orchestration and execution required to win a baseball game is so high.
Do you enjoy coaching it as much as playing it?
I do.
That's interesting.
Partially through the developmental lens, taking the non-sports coach approach to that and looking at baseball as a mechanism for personal growth for the kids playing the game. That is what I love about it. It's like, do I want to win the games? And only in so much as it helps them grow.
Good guy to have 2 sons.
Yeah, exactly. So the game for me both became an escape and also something that I was exceptional at. I mean, I was a really, really, really good middle infielder, but it was also the place where my psychology played out the most. And you could see in my performance between my father hitting me ground balls, for example, or taking ground balls in practice where I know I'm getting my reps in. You might hit me 100 and I might not make a single error. Might turn the fastest double play of anyone in 10 years or whatever. But then you put the added pressure of a game scenario where there's really something on the line and something changed in my psychology. And I would often carry that pressure as if it was a confirmation that I was not good enough. And that would lead to poor results at times. And so the game over time became a way for me to see myself in that way and understand what kind of support and development I needed from coaches and other authority figures so that I could actually perform at my best. And it's taught me a lot about what kind of environments I thrive in, what type of coaching I need. So that's the role the game's played in my life. The way I remember this story about this umpire's award is that our little league park, it goes from like, I don't know, T-ball starts at maybe age 5 to age 12 is when you kind of graduate out into middle school league or whatever. And the rising 11-year-olds going to 12-year-old year. So you're going to major, or from the first year of major league to the second year of major league. Now you're like the big kids at the park, basically. At opening day, the umpires would give an award. It was either opening day or closing day, but I remember it as opening day. The umpires would give an award to the rising 12-year-old who most represented the quality of sportsmanship that they wanted to be emblematic of the whole park's mentality on playing the game well.
Kind of like a young leadership award.
Exactly. Young leadership award, a coach's award, however you want it, like spirit of the park type thing. It's interesting actually looking back. So I would have said long ago, I did not ever want awards. I didn't really think of myself as getting them. But in fact, I think what was true is that every time an award was given, I actually did want it. I did believe that I was worthy of it. But I was looking for proof that I wasn't. It's like, that's not how I interpreted it at the time. But when I didn't win,
you were going to say you were trying to protect yourself from losing by telling yourself that you didn't want it. But in fact,
yes.
Oh, yes.
That is what was happening. So by the external story being, oh, I don't need the awards, it was protecting myself from the narrative. But in fact, the narrative still landed. If I didn't win the thing, it still landed as, oh, I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. I'm a piece of shit, Yeah. And so it did not protect me at all to say I don't want the award or recognition.
I think this is one of the great, I don't have an easy solution to it, but I think this is one of the great lessons of life is that so many of the things that we worry about, especially people who are chronic worriers, all your worry does not put you in a better position to handle the uncertainty of life. The negative things happen and it still hurts and stings, and the uncertain things come up and you still have to figure out how to manage them in the moment. And so it does not protect you despite all of the time and attention we give to it.
At all. And what I've learned now is that, no, I do want the awards, but I want to have earned them. I want to have earned them. And this goes back to this story. So it's opening day and, the lead umpire, Lionel, who became a middle and high school coach of me later on, he's on the mic and welcoming everyone to the park for the year. It's beautiful spring day, kind of chilly. First games of the year are going to be that afternoon. And he says, so, we're doing our umpires award for the year. And I feel this like rising awareness of, oh, I would like that award. But that story of like, but I should not want it because, disappointment and all of that. And he goes on and he tells a story about this person. And it could be me. The way he's telling the story is like, this could be me. I think this could be me. And then he says, and so the award goes to Chris Caputo. And Chris Caputo, God bless that man. I mean, he was just a gem. He was a hard worker. He showed up the right way. He wasn't the most naturally talented, but he played the game the right way. Funny story that if he would go on in middle school I was pitching and he had a foul ball down the first baseline and put his head down to run. I put my head up to run and go catch the ball, and he broke my nose with his helmet. But I don't know if that's symbolic or not of our relationship. So Chris wins the award and I'm devastated. Not outwardly, but inwardly devastated. After the fact, Lionel comes up to me and my parents and he says, Barrett, I want you to know that this was your award to lose. And here's why you didn't win it. You said in the last game of the playoffs last year, one of the last games in the playoffs last year, you got thrown out at home, trying to score a run. And you went back into the dugout crying and you slammed your helmet down. And that is the only difference between why you did and did not win this award, was that one moment when you lost your cool. And I can remember back then, the emotion of losing was so strong for me because I'm actually not totally sure why. I think it was like I was trying to be perfect. I was trying to be perfect in every way. And when I failed, it was just like, ooh, it ate me up. I cried out of anger, of like getting thrown out at first on a ground ball pissed me off as a 12-year-old. And so I had thrown my helmet down and shown myself in that light to everyone at the park that day. And Lionel wanted me to know this because it was effectively a message of, even when you think no one is paying attention to you, people are watching for your leadership. And oh boy, is that a double-edged sword, because there is a beauty to that. And I have tried to live my life that way, that I never know who's paying attention to me. And I really want people to see my values at work and my actions. And one of the ways I gauge this is, I've talked about my faith on this show before, but I don't lead with it. I'm not out here proselytizing and trying to get people to convert to Christianity, and that I don't feel like that's the way I want to live my life. But one of the things I do hold myself to is, if someone eventually finds out after knowing me for some period of time that I am Christian, one of the bars for my behavior in life is, will they say, oh, well, that makes sense? And that they then view Christianity as a positive force in the world as a result of seeing how I've behaved in our interactions over time. And that's a high standard, right? Yeah. And the flip side of this, of course, is the dark side, is that I don't allow myself the tolerance of letting myself down at times. And so this has been the work of this story throughout my life, is realizing that there is a powerful lesson here. And also I'm fallible. Like, I'm going to have my moments. And a big part of the thing I've had to learn over time is the grace for those moments, and not taking them as proof points of these old stories that weren't serving me, of like, oh, I knew I wasn't good enough or whatever. Yeah, that's actually like balance. I had a bad moment.
Hold yourself to a high standard, but not berate yourself when you fail to, reach it at every possible moment in life. It reminds me a little bit, Denzel Washington said, like, I think he was telling Ethan Hawke this or something, but the Oscars were being given out, and he was basically like, the award is better if I win it. In other words, like, the standard for how I act and how I perform in my career should be so high that it is actually an honor for the Oscar to be given to me, because I raised the average bar of what this award means. And, who knows if that's true or not, or if you can actually reach that standard, but it's a similar kind of thing that, like, somebody looks at you and finds out you're Christian. They're like, oh, I can see how he lives his life in that way. And it takes on a slightly better light because of the way that you do things.
Yeah, that's right. That's such a Denzelism.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit about kind of this failure, this lesson to learn here. I'm curious is there a compliment that you've received that you still think about to this day?
So I'm gonna choose one from this week, actually, because it landed with me differently than I think if I had received at any other time in my life. So I went on a former client's podcast. Tina Tower has been on the show. She's been a guest, and fabulous entrepreneur. She's earned millions of dollars in her life, served so many people so well. And as she was introducing me on her show this week, she said, I've worked with lots of coaches over the years, tens of coaches, and I've worked with some good ones. And what I can say is, without a doubt, for me, Barrett is the best coach in the world. And like, obviously this is within the context of her own experience, and she can only gauge what she's experienced. And so that's fine. But what I felt this week was, in the past, I think I would have said, oh, well, you're so kind, but that's obviously not true, or something like that. And what I noticed this week was that I felt neither attached to whether or not it was true, but nor did I feel any desire to push back on it. It was just like, this is Tina's perception of her experience with me. And what a gift it is to have her say that out loud to other people. And will I deliver on that for every person I ever work with? Probably not. I won't be the right fit for everyone. But am I okay with former clients who were really changed by our work saying this is the best coach you could work with? Like, yeah, I think that reflects the standard I'm holding myself to. And I felt a peacefulness at that comment that I've never been able to feel before. I really hope that I can solidify that way of receiving things, that I'm not craving it. I'm not looking for it out there in the world, but I'm also not rejecting it when it comes to me, that like, I'm really letting it just settle and saying, with this person, at least, her perception is that I was exactly what she needed. And because of that, she wants people to know that I might play that role in their life too. Like, what a gift. That is incredible.
It's a nice place to be. I feel like that with Atomic Habits sometimes now. Not everybody's going to rank it 5 stars. Some people aren't going to like it or won't be a good fit. But enough people have ranked it 5 stars that I can be like, it's a good book. Is it a perfect book? No, no book is perfect, but it's good. And I feel like you can accept that now, as your quality as a coach too. You're like, am I a perfect coach? No, I'm not a perfect coach, but I can trust that I'm good. And for some of my clients, I'll be the best they've ever had. And that's great. Touching on baseball or building off of that a little bit, this might be an interesting time to talk a little bit about your dad and kind of your relationship with him, both pro and con, and how you feel like that's shaped you in various ways, or, to whatever degree you want to talk about lessons learned there. This is my summary, not yours, but, knowing a little bit more about your backstory, I feel like there are negative ways in which you feel like your dad has influenced you, but then there's also these positive ways that maybe were less explicit in how they were like stated, but it was more like how he showed up for you, like, hitting all the ground balls at practice or things like that, where you feel like he maybe modeled this servant leadership. I don't know if that's even the word that you would want to use, but something like that, serving his kids. He was dedicated to you in that way. Maybe talk a little bit about that relationship and kind of the tension there and the lessons learned.
My relationship with my dad has a beautiful arc to it over time. And part of that arc is being rooted partially in pain from some of the ways that we interacted when I was especially younger. So my dad, just for to paint a picture, 5'8", he was in his 20s, a professional competitive bodybuilder. He won Mr. Florida at one point, and this was kind of in the era of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Chuck Liddell and a bunch of these well-known big
bodybuilding.
Exactly, yeah. And he lived in Central Florida, St. Petersburg, where there were outdoor gyms. He was just part of a culture at the time. And so he's this very kind of fit, masculine guy in the classic sense. Also, as a part of that culture, there were certain things people consumed at the time that changed behavior, in addition to changed musculature and all of that kind of stuff. And looking back, I can see how all of this shaped him as he kind of entered into marriage with my mom, which we talked a little bit about when my mom was on the show. And they did not want to have kids. So they were sure that they just wanted to be married and have each other. Around the holidays, they must have had fun, forgotten themselves, and 9 months later, here I was. So I was an accident. And I think a lot about this, the difference between the fact that my dad in a 12-week period went from, I know I don't want to have kids and I just want to be married to this woman, to we are about to have a kid. And how different that is from how you or I entered fatherhood. Of we knew we wanted to have kids. We did it at the time that we planned for. We were ready for it from an emotional and financial maturity standpoint. It's just a different thing. And so this is how my dad enters into my life. Is fit guy with a background. He was 35, got married to my mom. My mom was kind of like the ambitious breadwinner type person in the relationship, and he was finding his way. He was working at Lockheed Martin at the time, still bodybuilding, hadn't finished his college degree yet. He was just kind of finding his way in the world. And the way their relationship developed was that mom ended up being the breadwinner and kind of head of household in that way, and dad ended up being the caretaker, homemaker, taking care of my brother and I over time. And I really try and put myself in his shoes in terms of what must it have been like at that time. This is the late 80s, early 90s. To be a stay-at-home dad was weird.
Yeah.
Arnold made a movie about this, Mr. Mom, because it was so weird that it was like this thing that everyone gawked at.
Also, though, you are doing this now as we sit here. You are framing it in this way. But
yes,
when you were 12 and 8 and whatever,
it was just my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, the point I'm getting at there is whatever tension he felt internally,
I did not know.
You were experiencing it, but you were not acknowledging it the way
That's right.
You're acknowledging it now.
The way I experienced the tension at the time was in a very short fuse. And I interpret it now as overwhelm and maybe unhappiness with his role in the family. I'm not sure. I would have to ask him. But certainly a sense of overwhelm that came out at me as really big emotion at times. Sometimes yelling, sometimes him either threatening or actually getting physical with me. And this was hard. This shapes you, And what I learned through those interactions was I really learned to be aware, hyper aware of body language, demeanor, how he was moving through the house, what he was doing at any given time, And so before I would ask anything, something just very basic, like, can a friend come over and play outside while you're doing whatever you're doing? Or can I go knock on the neighbor's door so we can play basketball? Just like basic stuff. I would really try and gauge the vibe. And then sometimes I would override what I knew the vibe was, and I would ask for what I wanted anyways. And a lot of what I got back was really big energy, often yelling out of just frustration and overwhelm, which again, I didn't know at the time. And what I interpreted was things like, my needs don't matter. I'm a piece of shit. Why did I do that? Like, I knew better. I shouldn't be asking for this stuff. And so a big growth path in my life has been learning to use the hypervigilance as a tool. Number one, is an extremely helpful tool in my coaching work to really perceive what's going on with the other person. Incredible gift. But also to turn it off at times and to know that I cannot be harmed as an adult in the way that I really could be harmed as a child. Like, a big, strong dad can actually harm a child.
The hypervigilance is an example of how that experience perhaps shaped what now maybe you would call a strength, or at least you've found an effective way to channel it and utilize it. The other thing that you're kind of describing is a lot of looking for the conditions to be perfect for you to ask for what you wanted or what you needed.
Yes.
Do you see that in yourself now? And how willing are you to ask for what you need or to make a request versus how much do you feel like you need to wait for the stars to align for the conditions to be right?
So my default was waiting for the stars to align, which really ended up being like, I just didn't ask for help. What I have developed over time, I think my interim solution was really finding relationships where I knew where I stood, seeking safety and belonging at like a very explicit level with people. In our friendship, you may have noticed that, or in other friendships that are very close to me. It's like I really tried to get to the deepest level first where I knew I could trust it. And then in those places, I would often hesitate less, although I'd still hesitate. There's been a recent phase of development for me where I moved into, this is a skill. Making requests of people is a skill. And there's two parts of it, maybe more, but two key parts. One is being clear on the need and the ask. What is it that I need or want from anyone in my life at any given time in relationship? And two is being unattached to the response, not telling a story about myself based on the response I get back. Because if I ask you, James, do you want to come on a fishing trip with me? And you say no, that does not mean anything about the quality of our friendship. What it means is that trip at that time for those reasons is not something that fits with your priorities. That's probably the part I've had to practice the most, is the skill of receiving the answer without attachment and not telling myself a story about the meaning behind that. And one of my little hacks for that is, in close relationships especially, is going back and asking for clarity. It's like, okay, so you said no to that thing that I asked for. Can you tell me more about that? I just want to understand it because, maybe I'll share the story that I'm telling myself that you don't want to hang out, the story that you don't want to hang out. And then what I'll get back is like, oh no, I actually just have a thing booked that's really important for me that weekend. And so this helps complete the loop for me where it's like, oh, actually, I didn't really need to ask that because I know James is my friend. I actually have no questions about that. But what it does help me do is it ingrains this in me to where there's less and less of a need of that. And there's more freedom for me to just say, hey, can you do the thing? And you to say yes, no, or otherwise, and it's all good. And so that's the rapport that I've been trying to build with most people in my life.
So two things here. One, it's interesting that you've done this thing a couple of times when we've texted where you'll ask for something. Let's take the fishing trip, for example. And then I will sarcastically say something back like, well, that sounds like a terrible time. You will then like, wait a minute and then reply and be like, I know I'm telling myself that James is only saying this because we're close enough that he thinks he can joke with me about that. And I always think that is interesting when you say that, but what you're doing is you're coaching yourself in that moment. I don't have the same baggage about it. And so I'm like, yeah, whatever, just say the cutting remark. Like that's kind of what, I don't know. That's how my grandpa was. And it's kind of how I was raised and what I learned, right? It's like, you just poke fun at your friends, but you are still, processing through all that. And so anyway, I think that's kind of an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm affirming the friendship. That's what I'm doing in response is like, if I affirm the friendship, I can receive this really lightly.
Yeah.
And that may not, it like takes a lot of tolerance on your part to deal with that.
Well, it's fine.
I think it's a
big thing for me to deal with, but I think your description of it allows you to deal with it lightly. That is, a much more freeing way to go through the world, to proceed
Yeah.
lightly through the world and lightly through your relationships, rather than to assign so much value and weight to every response that people are giving you, and then turning that into some deeper story about you and your self-worth and who you are. And that's kind of the second thing that you made me think, which is, ironically, we ask these questions of people, we make these invites, we make these requests, and we view it as this mirror that reflects who we are. But the response that they give is almost always about them, not about you. And so, like when I started hosting these retreats for different authors, I would invite people and I was like terrified that everybody would say no and you would look like some loser who invited 10 people and they all declined. But in fact, everybody always says yes because they all want the same thing, which is somebody to have enough guts to step up and invite them to attend. And then whenever people say no, you're like, oh, it's not because they don't want to come. It's because they have already committed to some other thing that's going on. And that's just like the invite thing, right? But we do it for many other relationships in life too.
Yeah.
And somebody told me once, like, whenever you get a no, you should really just reframe in your head as not now. You're like, this is not the right time or not in the right way. It's not that people don't want to help or don't want to be involved or don't want you in their life. It's just that there are lots of pieces of life. And so there are other things that are preventing them from that. And if you instantly take that and view it in like the least generous way possible for your for your personal life, that, is a recipe for disaster.
It serves no one. And so here's a reframe for people, right? The next no you get, how could that no deepen the relationship rather than damaging it? And what I've grown in our relationship and I'm just using it because we're both here, right? It's not like you're the primary friendship in all of my life, but you are a key one for me. Yeah. You should be. That's right. The no's truly deepen. It's like someone once taught me, it was in a coach training. Sarah Halley was one of the trainers that was training me at the time. She said, I know I can trust someone with my requests when I hear no the first time. And that really shaped me because what I realized is a loving no is the most courageous answer to a request, because it means I have enough confidence in our relationship that it will survive me saying no to a thing I do not want to do.
Especially early on, because you feel this pressure to say yes right away because the relationship's new or whatever. You don't have that much context. You kind of feel this social pressure to not decline someone right away.
That's right.
Okay, you have a quote that you wrote down. I want to read it to you, and then I want you to just unpack it and tell me a little more about it. You said, as a child, I loved being recognized for good work I had already done. But despite this, I learned to kind of subvert that desire because it wasn't good in our family values to need recognition. So it was like we should be humbled or be motivated by doing the right thing, even if we weren't recognized. Just tell me a little more about that and kind of how you feel like that shaped you.
I think there's a Thomas Carlyle quote about this. That's something like doing things without regard for the credit they will bestow upon you or something like that. I don't remember if it's Carlyle or someone else, but basically doing things without a desire for credit has always been something that was instilled in me. We did a lot of service work as a family growing up. We would go out to Habitat for Humanity for the day, or our church. I grew up in a Methodist church. We would have these great days of service a couple times a year. My dad was often a project leader. I'd go with my uncle to a soup kitchen on day before Thanksgiving, like stuff like this. I was just always out in the community, mission trips, that kind of thing. And so part of it's probably a faith-driven message of like, you don't do good things in the world so that people will recognize you for them. You do good things in the world because they're of service to others. And I do still believe this. That like there is just a layer of behavior that is because it creates a more wholesome world. Like I do try and live my life that way. Also, it's really nice when people see that. It is really nice when people see that. And I actually don't think there's anything wrong with benefiting from and enjoying praise you get for the positive attributes you show in the world. And that's been the change here, is going from almost this like I am sentenced to do things in the world and I will never be seen for them, to this is the way I choose to be in the world, and I will receive whatever good comes back to me from it. And also, if nothing good comes back to me, I still choose to be this way. And so there's like a little bit more just kind of depth and maturity to it, where I'm choosing how I want to be. I don't reject or run away from praise that comes back to me or good things that come back to me as a result of it. but I'm also not doing it for that reason. And I think finding that balance in there has been a much more mature place to land. Praise is not bad. Reward is not bad. It is doing things only for praise or reward that I think is slightly perverted. Before we get back to the show, I want to take a moment to welcome Proper as the very first founding sponsor of Good Work. Proper is the perfect fit as our first sponsor because on the show, we explore the inner journey of outward success. And the truth is, so much of that success depends on the people that we surround ourselves with. Proper is all about that. They pair you with a highly trained executive assistant who takes the weight of email, scheduling, and follow-ups off your shoulder so you can focus on the work only you can do. This is about having the right support so you can keep growing your business without burning out along the way. I'm thrilled to have Proper alongside us on this journey to make the Good Work show what I know it can be. You can get started today at workwithproper.com. Make sure to mention the Good Work podcast and your onboarding fee will be completely waived. That's a $500 value. So again, that's workwithproper.com to schedule your discovery call today. And don't forget to mention Good Work. All right, let's get back to the show.
It's interesting to hear about your background a little bit, or just the upbringing and doing this kind of service work, because I see that not only in you now in a service capacity, but also in your interest in the world at large and larger societal issues, or just having a more wholesome or beneficial or kind world. We don't necessarily have to dive into the politics of it or anything like that, but I am curious about whether you think that those early years kind of led into some of that interest. And then one of the little questions I wrote down, I was just interested to get your take on, if you could conduct like some kind of citywide poll or nationwide poll, whatever, pick whatever scale you want, but what is it that you would want to learn from a population level?
Okay. Oh, this is good. All right. So as I look at the formation of my psychology over time, and really I think about my job as helping people master the psychology of entrepreneurship. Like if I dialed it down just to one positioning statement, that's what it is. It is mastering the psychology of entrepreneurship. And there's self-awareness, there's tapping into those 3 channels that we talked about earlier. There's all these tools to get at that. But it's really just mastering the inner game of doing what you set out to do in the world. And I just happen to focus on entrepreneurs.
Which interestingly ties back to what you mentioned, like maybe 30 minutes ago or something, which is people often know what they want to do. Entrepreneurs know what they want to do, or they know some deeper answer, but there's all these obstacles, mostly internal, because this roller coaster ride of emotions, and sometimes external as well. And so you are essentially guiding them toward what they already know they want, but they are preventing themselves from having.
That's right. And they pay me a lot of money to get the thing they say they already want. And it's just, it's funny, but it's like, people need that. Okay. So when I look at the formation of my psychology related to all of this, here's how I think it went. I think I received lots of messages that were, we are here to be of service to others, just like we just talked about. I also received lots of messages that, maybe my needs didn't matter. And the other side of my dad is all the wonderful stuff he did, made all our meals, took me to practice, coached all my teams, like the servant leadership stuff was just modeled and modeled and modeled and modeled every day of my life. So I knew what it meant to serve, but I also kept getting these messages that my needs and requests they're scary because what I get back is like these dangerous emotions and reactions. So in the face of that, what I think happened as I, psychoanalyze myself is that I formed a response, which was 2 things: be perfect and be of service. And if I am perfectly of service in the world, maybe one day I'll earn the right to ask for a thing or 2. And so I think this was kind of the root of the psychology, was like, if I do enough good stuff, maybe that'll earn me the right to where people won't be angry at me when I say like, hey, can I go outside and play with my friends or whatever? This all sounds very sad, by the way. I'm not sad about it. It's honestly just me making meaning of my life. And I love my dad. We have a great relationship now because I work through all this stuff and I understand it differently. So I really want people to hear it that way, that like I have come to a wholesome, wonderful relationship with both of my parents by understanding these stories. And so I've shaped this way of being. And I think that I then applied that to my whole life, where if I do enough good in the world, someday it will come back to me in forms that I need or that I want deep down. And what I had to start to unbundle was this can become toxic. Like I took a very egotistical approach of, I'm going to put the weight of the world on my shoulders. I'm going to take all of the knowledge of the world, all of the issues in the world, and I'm going to try and figure out how I can solve all of them. And the embodiment of this was, for a long time, the obvious endpoint of my career was I was going to be president of the United States. That's the only way. That's the most good a person can do, because that is the highest leverage role in this world. Like that is the psychology of this thing, how far I took it.
I was just about to ask, so your dad, I feel like, displays this capacity to suffer, basically.
Yes.
Bodybuilding, for sure, is lots of suffering for some long-term outcome or gain. But then also just the role of, hitting all the ground balls and cooking all the meals and driving all the practice runs and all of that stuff. Like, that is, for a certain type of person, there is a comfort in being the kind of person that is the sacrificial lamb, is maybe the wrong word, but just the one that everybody always relies on and is always like giving of themselves for that work. Do you see any of that in yourself?
Oh, yeah. So destined to suffer, or sentenced to suffer, is kind of this phrase that came to me on this. And there's this great book called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. And it's about how, if we want to get into the science side of it, basically we get certain traits passed down epigenetically because ways of being in the world flip on and off certain genes. And then those things get passed down, and then the same behavioral patterns get played out again. So that's the best science-based understanding I have of this. And I think there's still a lot to be researched here to figure out if it's true. So I'm not claiming truth. I'm just claiming this is what I have found. One of the concepts in Mark Wollin's book is that, at least at the psychology level, we can sometimes tend to take on the personality traits of our parents as a way of trying to relate to them and bond to them. And what I believe happened for me is that I saw my dad suffering, as evidenced by his frustration and anger that would come out at me at times. And I believe that for a lot of my adult life, I believed I was sentenced to suffer in the same way he did. And it really took me having
almost as if the reward is not valuable enough, or you're not worthy of the reward unless you are suffering.
That's right.
Exactly. You see this a lot as just a specific version of it with writers. There's a lot of writers that feel like if they don't have a terrible life, they have nothing to write about.
Exactly.
So they almost are requiring themselves to live a miserable existence in order to produce something decent.
Yeah. And so I had to consciously detach from this way of being, this way of thinking about my life. And I remember very distinctly two things. One was, there was a day where I asked myself the question, what if I let go of this endpoint I've been holding on to? What if I have no idea how my life will go? Maybe there's politics in the future. Maybe I never step foot in any political office ever. How would that change my life if I let go of this endpoint that I've been holding in my mind? I mean, I would not say anything in public that I would not want in a presidential campaign quoted later. That is how deeply this ran in me. And I remember that day asking that question, and then I remember the day I let it go. And I said, maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I'm not going to hold on to it anymore. And then the other one is, I remember where I was sitting when I had a conversation with my coach where I acknowledged, I think I have blended with my father, and I no longer want to live that way. I don't want to live as if I am destined for suffering in this life. I want to live as if I am destined for unknown things, many of which will be good. It sounds like a decision. It was a long process to get there, but that decision was the beginning point of really transforming my life from there. And that's been in like the last probably 4 years.
All right, I'm going to do some compressing of your story here, and you can expand as you want, and just want to make sure I have enough time to cover things. High school, you told me before, you kind of view that as almost like the lost years, not just in sense of time slipping away, but you kind of felt lost and unmoored and, needed to try to find yourself in various ways, which you either did or didn't do it at various times. And through college, I think maybe you had an arrest in there at some point that was kind of a, maybe an inflection point of some sort, or a lesson for you in some sort. And then eventually that leads into, you have a couple leadership roles and, things you did both as a student leader and then also, your kind of early career where you started to sample entrepreneurship in various ways. If we were to take that, say, 10-year span from like 14 to 24, or 16 to 26, something like that, is there anything you really want to pull out of there and kind of emphasize?
Yeah, so I'll try and do it somewhat quickly because, truly I am lucky to have survived the years of 16 to 20. And I mean that not at all metaphorically. Like, I am actually lucky to have survived that period of time. So my aunt and uncle got divorced, I think about the age of 13, and they lived very close to us. My two cousins went to school with me. My girl cousin was in my grade. And she responded to the divorce by beginning to drink a lot and do a lot of drugs at the age of like 13, which now as a parent, I just think, oh my God. I mean, that is horrible for someone to have to suffer in that way. But her parents were distracted by everything going on in their own lives. And that's what happened. And I remember the night at the age of 16, I was terrified of drinking. I was terrified of drugs. I was terrified of doing the wrong thing. I mean, we've heard this whole story, right? Like I was trying to live my life as if I was perfect. And it was just this drumbeat of being around it. And this is where these feelings of not feeling loved or not feeling good enough come in as well. What I realize now is mostly what I needed during these years was a couple really close friends who I could lean into and trust and know that they cared for me. And I just needed to like lots of hugs from my parents, basically, as simple as that sounds. I needed to be able to go to them and say things like, everyone around me is drunk 3 nights a week right now. And it terrifies me. Like I am so scared of this culture that is evolving, and it centers on my aunt and uncle's house. And we were always there because my mom and her sister are so close. And so it was just this drumbeat of drinking that I was around all the time, and me saying no, 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 no. And then finally one night when I was 16, it was like I got tired of people laughing at me, basically. And I had my first beer, and it was like my life went off the rails for the next 4 years. And so there was just a lot of binge drinking, drugs, drug dealing that I was around, chasing girls, basically trying to, what I know now is I was trying to feel loved and supported. And the only way I thought at the time I could do that was by engaging in all the behaviors everyone that I was around that was kind of like the cool crowd was doing, so that I wouldn't have to deal with feeling like on the outside, essentially. And I just totally lost myself for this period of time. And it wasn't just one arrest, it was 3 arrests. I got arrested for the first time at 16. I got arrested again at 18. And then I got arrested again, or 17. And then again at 18 in my first semester at college, all for drinking. I mean, I will never forget being in downtown Atlanta jail, or in the paddy wagon on the way to jail. Me and my 16-year-old friend who was a girl, she was like a 6 foot tall, she had some tiny little outfit on because we were going to a concert with a bunch of friends. And we walked into the Atlanta jail, and the African-American lady checking us in said, "Babies, y'all don't belong here." And it was like this slightly nurturing, slightly threatening statement of, this is not a good place for you two tonight on this Saturday night in the middle of Atlanta. And so anyways, I got arrested again my freshman year of college, and I went on probation, both with the school and legally.
I was going to ask if that impacted school at all. If it,
yeah. So if I had gotten in trouble again, I would have been kicked out. And then I had to go to AA meetings for like 6 months. I had a probation. I mean, it was the whole 9 yards. Like it was absurd looking back. It basically scared me straight. They punished me so harshly that I was scared. It revealed the 2 paths ahead of me. It was like I was either going to keep going on the path I was on and end up dead in jail or otherwise, or I was going to have to choose something different. And this was where all the leadership stuff started to come in. And the key things, I've thought a lot about this, like what was it that allowed me to choose the other path? Because I had not done any inner healing around any of it. It's not like I went from trying to get love by being drunk and chasing girls to, oh, I don't need that anymore. It was like, I'm scared to get kicked out of school.
Never would have described your early years the way that you've described them today. Right. You hadn't processed any of that.
Right. So I think the key was I was surrounded by a few men who showed me the way. I had joined a fraternity that had been kicked off campus about 6 or 7 years before, after the death of a fraternity brother. And they had just come back about a year or 2 before I joined. And they were very, very leadership focused at the time. It was like all of the campus nerds, or campus tools, as we used to call them at the time, that were very involved, all went into one fraternity. Interestingly, looking back now, this wasn't known or it wasn't transparent at the time, but there were a lot of gay men in the fraternity. And I find that very fascinating now, that it was like this very wholesome, brotherly community. And a lot of that was fueled by gay men who had all congregated there, but they were not out at the time. And I'm not making any particular meaning of that, other than to say that those men became my guides for where I am today. And they introduced me to things. They put me in charge of the pledge program at the time. That was my first time building a leadership curriculum. We read How to Win Friends and Influence People as the core of like the backbone of the program. We did study hours, workout time. Like it was a very wholesome program for a fraternity at the University of Georgia. And then that led to leading recruiting. And then I became president of the fraternity. Then I became an orientation leader on campus. And it was like the world opened up to me through this path of leadership and service. And it was like I finally had an outlet for all of this stuff that I had observed throughout my life. And it wasn't destructive.
Do you think people who knew you in high school would have been surprised to see this arc? Or
Yes.
been surprised to see you as president of the fraternity?
I think the people who spent the most time around me in high school would have been surprised. And the people who were my true friends in middle school who I abandoned in high school would have been not at all surprised. So it's like, if we cut out the years of 16 to 20, no one in my life would have been surprised.
Yeah. It's interesting because you like have this umpire's moral leadership award that you like almost get, selected for when you're 12. And then you've got this dark period in between where there seems to be nothing leadership oriented going on. And then you're back at, president of the fraternity a few years later.
Yeah, that was the arc.
What about when you transition into the business world? So now you're maybe finding your footing a little bit more. I think of it, it's not my story, but as I like look at it, I'm like, okay, I first met you out of WDS and you were kind of doing Living for Monday. And then you've also got like the Fizzle years in there where you're working with Chase and Corbett. And I don't know how you think about that package of time and what you were doing then. That was like kind of the beginning of our friendship and getting to know each other. And I feel like a thing that came up frequently at either retreats or conferences or whatever, dinners and stuff, is everybody would always like it if you would like lead a conversation or ask a question or like more or less like slot you into this unofficial coaching role. And I don't know that you really resisted it. I think in the moment you probably enjoyed it in the middle of the dinner or in the middle of the retreat or whatever. But from a career perspective, you did resist it. So I guess both just kind of how you think about those early years and lessons learned, and also what was the obstacle there when other people could see your strength, but you were not ready for some reason to step into it.
Out of school, I went to Ernst & Young and was a management consultant. And that was just purely external success factor driven. It's like that was the kind of holy grail of job coming from the school I was at in the study background of accounting and finance. That was just a basic mistake of like, let me go do the thing that everyone respects. I got 8 months into that and I realized this was a very bad idea. And what I know now is I was born to be an entrepreneur and I was born to lead. When you're 22, that's a weird thing, or 24, because people aren't exactly walking around looking for 24-year-old leaders of organizations, teams, whatever, coaches. And so one version of the story we could tell is I had to earn the wisdom and experience necessary to be able to do what I was great at. And it didn't feel like that at the time. It didn't feel good at the time along the way. I mean, we had a lot of conversations where it felt very bad and I was trying to find a way out of all of that. But my first business was essentially a bad business model. I picked college students as my customer base, and college students are poor. And so it was like a real world MBA and just the mechanics of business at the time. So when that failed, from that point in 2014, when I joined a company called Fizzle, which was kind of like teaching the early innings of the creator economy, really great idea. If we had ridden that thing, that could have been a really big business. Whole other story we're not going to get into. I left Fizzle. I actually got fired. The one time I've been fired in my life, I got fired at Fizzle and I went to ConvertKit. The time from ending Living for Monday, my first company, and leaving ConvertKit was really me trying to earn the right to become an entrepreneur again. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, I had to dig out of a debt-ridden financial hole. I had to rebuild my relationship to my wife in a way that she trusted it eventually again. But I also needed to gain business experience. Like I really needed to challenge myself and gain all of the business skills that I had failed at in the first endeavor and get back to a place of being confident that I could do it again. The reality is that I probably could have done it again immediately, but I did not have the confidence to go do that. And I also didn't have the financial means to go do it.
Something you said to me around that time, I still remember this. It was like early. It was maybe the first time that we had a retreat after you had started working at ConvertKit with Nathan, is you said like, I've learned that I'm really good when I have resources available, resources at my disposal. And so I think there was this period where your early entrepreneurial endeavors, every entrepreneur or many entrepreneurs are kind of bootstrapping it and trying to figure out how to make it work without really having any money. Yeah, maybe that didn't work out. And so then you start to question your ability or your confidence degraded a little bit. And then you step into this role with Nathan where, oh, suddenly I do have some money to work with and I can start to trust my decision-making abilities again. You get a couple wins under your belt and then you're like, okay, maybe I wasn't totally off base to start. And so anyway, I think about you saying that and then the courage that would be required to go out on your own again, where you're like, well, suddenly I don't have a ton of resources at my disposal. So maybe talk through that choice again and how you
I think that's really wise looking back at it. I remember saying that to you now, although I wouldn't have remembered it on my own. And that is true. I know how to allocate resource well, I think, relatively speaking. I make mistakes, of course, but another version of the story is that I went and built the asset base I needed so that there was some resource available for me to take another shot. And if we look at how I got back to entrepreneurship, I reached a point when I decided I no longer deserved suffering and I was going to choose something different because I was suffering in my role at ConvertKit for a period of time, not because of anyone, just because it wasn't a good fit for me anymore. It wasn't what I wanted. That's it. That's the whole story. I didn't want it anymore. And rather than acknowledge that, I was suffering. And so I had to get to this place of like, I don't want to suffer anymore. I had to get permission from my wife that it was okay for me not to suffer in that way anymore. But most importantly is we had enough stock we could sell that I would have financial resources to bridge a gap between things. And honestly, that we could strip away all the psychology of it and it might just be that. It's like big in the context of the world, small in the context of a lot of the peer group that we have and a lot of the people I work with. The asset base, as I think about it, was a chunk over here to retire some debt, a chunk in investments where if it sits there for 30 years, we could live in a tiny apartment and be like basically okay on very modest means when we retire. And then a chunk where I had 18 months of runway to go do something new. So that was the amount of money it represented to us. The dollar amounts don't matter. And just that amount of space gave me just enough daylight to say, all right, let's go do it. Mm-hmm. But first, I had to go do 18 months of other stuff to try and convince myself that there wasn't a better job out there. There wasn't another place I could be employed. Like I really had to test it because I was still fighting myself. I was scared. I wasn't even fighting. I was just scared, man. I was scared to do it again because it's the ultimate test. Mm-hmm. It's like, I think I've learned all this stuff. I built a $30 million company. Look how cool it is.
Yeah.
But starting from zero.
I think one of the interesting things for me, again, from the outside is that this time you're playing to your strengths. The things that people would ask you to do just because you're around are now the things that your clients ask you to do and you get paid for. And
that's right.
I don't know, there is an interesting process there of some sort, it takes you a while in life, not you specifically, but any person, a while to figure out what your strengths are. I mean, you need enough reps, you need enough days to learn, oh, I'm not good at these things and I am good at those things. But there also was some form of acceptance that had to happen for you where you were like,
surrender.
Yes. And I'm just curious what that was. Why now? Why did you surrender now and not before?
Okay, so I did what I call 3 6-month career experiments. I made a book about climate change with Seth Godin called The Carbon Almanac. That was all volunteer. I was the managing editor. That renewed my faith in, okay, my leadership skills are transferable. It wasn't just this one context at this one company. Then I went and joined my friends at a local coffee company as COO here in Portland. That was just pure fun, but there was no money in it. And then I went back into the tech world and joined a climate tech company called Panthalassa here in Portland. And that fixed the two big things I thought were missing before. It was in person, so I was no longer remote. And it was a big mission tied to solving climate change, which, like, if you don't believe in climate change and you listen to this, don't abandon me just because we disagree on that, please. I know it's annoying to some of you. It's a thing I believe in. 3 or 4 months into that role, I was feeling the exact same as I did at ConvertKit after 5 years. And I thought, now this is interesting. Different context, different mission, different human beings showing up to work every day.
Yeah, you can't
I'm in
blame
an office.
The people. You can't say, oh, it's the coworkers or whatever. Not that you were doing that before, but just, very different situation. And yet you're left with that same feeling in your stomach.
What's common? Good old BB. And this forced me to acknowledge what was true, which was that I was done working for people. Like I had formed such a strong opinion on what good leadership looks like. It just didn't make sense to work for someone else anymore. I had to go test it for myself. So I had to acknowledge that to my coach first. And the next question was, well, what is the clearest and simplest and shortest path to having infinite runway? This is a really important concept that I now talk about a lot, is if you can earn yourself infinite runway, you can make infinite mistakes. And what infinite runway means is just find a business model that pays the bills, and now you've got freedom to do whatever you want with your time. So I ask myself is, what is the business model that I can put in place that will take the least amount of time so that I can spend all my other time doing two things? Writing was the first one. Doing the writing, it wasn't just metaphorical. I was talking about the success I've seen you have and what I would like for myself, and exploring business ideas for the company I might want to build. Coaching slotted right into that. So at first, coaching was a practical solution to a practical problem of good business model, small amount of time. I knew how I could structure it to pay my bills, and it gave me infinite runway. But I also left the door open. I said, and maybe coaching becomes the calling. I'm not sure, because I knew exactly what you said. In the back of my mind, I've always been great at this thing. And I think the only thing preventing me from fully surrendering to it then in the way that I have now is just I know the stories that come up in my own mind when I hear someone say they're a coach. It's like not the most respected profession by default. The thing that got me over this was I had been working with my coach for 5 years at the time. He was probably the second most important person in my life during my career transition. My wife, and then him, and then our friend group was next. He's talented, he's skilled, he showed up consistently, he had all the right exercises and the right wisdom at the right time. I couldn't have done it without him. Well, I would have done it. I couldn't have done it as elegantly without him. And he was kind of shepherding my process along the way. And I thought, well, I don't know what most coaches are like, but I know that guy's world class. And so I'm just going to be like him. So I ripped off his business model. I put it right into my business model and spreadsheet. And I said, I'm going to train like a professional athlete would train to become great at their job, but for coaching. And if all I ever do is I become a better developer of people and that leads me to lead a company later, like great. But if it means I'm going to be a coach for a long time, I literally want to be one of the best in the world. Not because it's important to me to be better than everyone else, but because I really believe that the reason coaching gets a bad rap in some circles is I just don't think people who call themselves coaches take it seriously enough a lot of the time. I think they treat it more like this is a means for me to pay my bills than this is a sacred role in someone's life. I mean, they are putting their livelihood in your hands. A lot of times I'm the only person that knows some of the things my client tells, literally the only person, because it is so scary for them to admit things that are going on inside of them. I think that deserves a level of seriousness to it. And so the thing that's allowed me to fully surrender to this being like, wow, I think I might be great at this one day, is that I see real change happening in the people I work with. I see how good it has felt to develop myself in this way, to like really commit. I go train intensely. Like I think I did 11 days of dedicated training last year, in person, on retreats, with 6-month program in between. I'm doing it again this year. And I just see how much that benefits my clients. And honestly, just how good it feels to develop and become great at a thing. It's freaking fun to become great at a thing. And then when I tack on how much leverage it gives me, it's like if I build one company as the CEO, I get to impact all of the team and then our customers, and that's great. But if I add up the number of audience members of all of my clients right now,
huge.
I think it might be more than 10 million people.
Yeah. You lead the leaders, you really have a ripple effect.
It's pretty cool.
Yep.
And so now it's just like, it doesn't even feel hard, James.
That's a huge
It just
signal.
feels like
that's a very strong signal. What's the thing that you're so good at, or that is so natural to you that it's almost hard for you to describe how you do it well, because you don't even really know any other way to be? It's like the way that you were encoded. It's like in your personality, it's in your DNA. It's just how you operate in the world. And if you can find something that's aligned with that, that's just such a beautiful way to get great results. And then you work hard on top of it. That's how you get really, really great outcomes. I think a couple things you said there that stood out. One, if you have infinite runway, you can make infinite mistakes. That is a beautiful line of thinking. Like, what is the minimum amount that you need to live? And can you figure out the most seamless way to just make that money and get that done? And now, with every other hour in the day, you have infinite runway to make mistakes. That can be a really powerful way to end up in a good spot in a couple of years and not have to wait 40 years for retirement to end up living a life that you enjoy. Do you think you have more thoughts or feelings?
I have the most sensations, and that is probably closely followed by feelings. And I believe that, one of my greater weaknesses is I can be verbose, as you know. And I believe that is because the depth of my feeling towards people in my life or towards experiences that I have is such that it is hard to verbalize. It's hard to put into words. Like, I think that's my superpower, is the depth of emotional experience that I have. And as I have learned to fully harness that and acknowledge it and not like cut off the ends of it, I used to not really allow myself to feel joy or to acknowledge pain. That's that whole suffering thing. I got so good at suffering, I wouldn't even acknowledge it. Now I've got my full range, and it's like, man, I'm a superhero when it comes to emotional experience. Translating that in a way that resonates to others is difficult for me. And this is why my writing, it just takes a different quality. Forever I tried to do the how-to type stuff, and I'm settling into beginning to just share my story as a way of teaching, quote unquote. And I think in the age of AI, story is also what is going to remain as uniquely human. And story of my own life allows me to capture that emotional experience in a way that trying to describe it in thoughts doesn't as well. And I'm really beginning to lean into that. The other thing I've been leaning into more, I don't even know if I told you this, is poetry. Poetry feels like I am speaking the language of the heart or soul. Like I'm speaking at the emotional level. And I don't have to fully explain it. I just can let it live with you in the way that it lives with you. And I'm not going to claim that as like a future path or anything. But when I hear poets like David White, or John O'Donohue, or even some of Maria Popova's poetry that she's written over time, there's some quality to that I feel matches my inner world differently than other stuff I've encountered. So there's just something kind of emerging there.
Interesting. I don't want to go too far without touching on parenting at least. Did you always imagine that you would be a dad? Did you think that you would enjoy being a dad? What was your vision of the role before you became one?
It's funny because I don't think I thought a lot about getting married or who I was going to marry before I was in the relationship I knew I was going to marry the person in. But then once I had my relationship with my wife, Nicole, it began to become very obvious to me that I was meant to be a father. One of the core roles that I am to play in this life is to be a father. And it's interesting as a contrast, right, to my own dad's experience. He had the opposite. But I think that my capacity for digesting all that I have experienced in life, all of the hardship, all of the challenge, all of the difficulty, and all of the good stuff. A big part of my work has been processing good stuff and letting it sink in. That is benefiting lots of people. And I am very grateful for that. And I will do that until I am not on this earth anymore. And I hope for a long time after that. I really hope that I am able to leave something behind that expands people's hearts beyond my existence. But if all that went away, if all I do in this entire life that I live is set my sons up to know the fullness of their emotional experience, that they are fully and truly loved and that they do not have to do anything or suffer in any way to earn that love, that exists separate from anything they ever do or achieve, and that they have full freedom, agency, and license to surrender to their gifts. Like that's it. That's all I'm here for, and that's okay. I don't think it's all I'm here for, but if that were it, I would be okay with that.
Sometimes I think the hard part about parenting is that you have to change your own behavior so you can role model what you want your kids to do. What have you seen any of that for yourself, or have there been parts of yourself that have come out there where you're like, I didn't want to have to deal with that shadow part of my personality again, or I didn't want to have to, change this behavior. I'm curious what comes up there.
Okay, there's two ways this moves through me. So one is sometimes I just feel my dad being channeled through me, and my kids will ask something for me and I'll be all grumpy in response. And I've gotten really good at noticing when it happens. Sometimes my wife will help me notice as well and saying, all right, hold on, let's go back and repair that because we're not going to leave those wounds behind. And so even if I'm irritated, I'll notice it and then I'll slow down. I'll get down on a knee to their level and I'll say, hey, buddy, I noticed you just asked a thing and I responded like this. And that's not cool. You don't deserve that. That's about me, not you. Can you say it again? And say it again and whatever. We'll have a conversation. I'll say, all right, we're okay from my side. Are we okay from your side? Is there anything else you need from this? And so that's been a behavioral modification where like I may not be able to prevent it every time from coming out, but I can always repair it in a way that doesn't leave the lasting wound there. And then the other one is with my oldest kid. His personality expression so far is like looking in a mirror. And so all of that stuff we talked about earlier about how awesome I think I was as a little kid, it's like I get to live that now with him. Mm-hmm. And because of all of that insight, when I'm feeling out of sync with him or something's up or I can just see he's off, all I have to do is I go inside and I say, all right, let's access, my kid's 5-year-old Barrett. If 5-year-old Barrett were behaving like 5-year-old Everett right now, what would he have needed? And like 9.9 times out of 10, I nail it with him. That has been healing for me, and I think is healing for him too, because he feels understood in those moments. But it can be irritating because it's like, why are you like this right now? And it's like, well, would you like to ask yourself that question?
It's 50% you, and you can certainly see it show up. If you traded places with your wife for a day, if you traded places with Nicole for a day, what part of the experience would you be most interested in, I don't know, seeing from her side?
Oh, that's such a rich question. I think a father's love is extremely important in a child's life. There's no doubt about that. And that's not to say anything like, obviously children with two mothers, it's similar dynamic. It's just they have two moms instead of a dad and a mom. So I'm not commenting on that, but there is something especially sweet about a mother's love and a child's love for one another. I had to work through this too. My mom worked. And so I breastfed for 2 weeks and she was back to work. Mm-hmm. Like I did not have a lot of what I needed from my mom during my days. And I've had to do some like craniosacral work and other stuff to like shed that literally shake that out of my body. Like this sense of not being loved at 3 weeks old because my mom's not there kind of thing. Even though I know, I know she loved me. I know that she was taking care of me in the way that she could. Also, I just factually didn't have my mom there. My kids have had their mom there. And this might seem kind of weird. Honestly, like the connection of breastfeeding might be one of the most wholesome things I've ever seen. And that experience just for a day with all of this stuff that's hard about it, I think that experience might be the sweetest. That might be the thing I most wanted to see through her eyes.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. How do you think about growing the business and family and how that the trade-off of all that and how it slots in and how much you're there and how much you aren't and what that means? And I don't know, just how are you going to try to play that dance?
I think this has been the richest quality of our friendship over recent years is our thoughtful back and forth about how we are building the balance between what we hope to build and the impact we hope to make and our families and what they deserve of us. So I'll just say that. Thank you for that. Surrendering to coaching has ironically opened way more doors than if I had tried to start from something bigger. It's like the number of doors I could walk through now for what I want to build is more than ever. It seems like it would get smaller. But as my reputation as a coach grows and the demand for me grows, there's like endless possibility here.
Actually, I just want to double click on that for a second because it's a deep lesson that's somewhat counterintuitive and it makes a lot more sense once you've lived through it. But focus in the long run does not limit your opportunities, it expands them. And yes. So it is by being focused and committed to something, trying in whatever sense this means for you to make it a craft and become the world's best at your unique little thing that opens up enormous numbers of pathways and opportunity and so on. But it is only on the other side of focus. It's not by optionality and keeping your options open, which is the thing that everybody kind of says on the surface that they want is this freedom. But the freedom comes through constraint, which is a surprising thing until you have kind of lived through it and seen how that can open up.
100%. And I'm living through that right now. And the more I focus, the more stuff has flowed to me and the less I have to go out and get it. So right now, my biggest challenge is that I have too much opportunity that I cannot deliver on. And this may change. I'm sure it'll go through waves, and that's great. But right now, in this moment, as we record, what I am thinking a lot about, which is going to come back around to the family piece, is what are the versions of this I can build, not to get away from one-on-one coaching work, which I love and I don't want to get away from, but so that all of the additional dollars that we make from here are not 100% dependent on my availability of hours. I think about, are there businesses I could acquire? Do I want to build a coaching firm? Do I want to just hire some coaches who come to work for me? Do I want to move into courses and training? Do I want to focus on writing books? Maybe I want to do all of this over time, and what's the right sequencing of it? So all of these options are available to me right now. Going back to the resource thing, what's most interesting to me is I'm really curious about what businesses could I acquire that would emphasize all of my strengths that I have and expand the impact of them through the work of others. So are there different businesses out there in the world that take everything I've become great at now, or I'm on the way to becoming great at as a coach, and then multiply those gifts in new ways? This is a question I'm asking myself. So the way that relates to family, though, is ultimately the question here is, what do I want my days to look like? There is impact, there is scale, there is like wealth and all of that stuff. You know, it's a factor. But at the end of the day, I have learned that if my days do not align in the way I want to be spending them, it doesn't matter the conceptual idea of what I'm building.
Yep.
And a big part of what I want my days to look like is that I want to put my kids to bed on half the nights of the week, or at least 3 out of 7. I want to have family dinner more nights than not. You know, at most, I maybe want to be on the road a week a month, you know, a few days a month, like at most. So I don't want to be designing for travel. Like there's already enough essential stuff that I have to travel for, training myself and other things like that, that I don't want to be building business models around traveling.
Yeah, it informs the strategy. Don't optimize
exactly.
the business for things that are going to require that.
Right. I also want to keep making my podcast. I want to write. I want to coach. So if I'm going to be the CEO of a thing, there needs to be a really supportive team there. And that's what will allow me to still maintain my focus on family alongside the stuff that matters to me. It may change the shape of my role. Maybe actually there's a CEO and I'm there in some other role. So I'm thinking a lot about things like that right now in terms of how do I balance my, what I'm calling centered ambition, which is ambition from a place of wholeness and enoughness, with the life that I want to lead day to day and the husband and father I want to be to my children 30 years from now, and how I want them to look back on this time.
Yeah, it's critical. We talk about this a lot and have talked about it a lot. It's easy to want the results. I mean, everybody wants the business to be successful or the, you know, the big outcome, but do you want the daily life that is required to get there? And if you don't want the daily life, to want the result is just a recipe for disaster and frustration. And also it's not going to turn out well. Like you need to be all in on your days. Otherwise the long-term thing is not going to work out. You're just going to end up feeling frustrated. Is there a certain type of entrepreneur that you have found like you're really well suited for, or like a certain type of creator that, you know, we talk about like the shape that the business is going to take? Who is it that you feel like is really in your sweet spot?
So there's like characteristics of them. And then there's like things you can write down that are traits. And then there are ways of being, I guess is the way I would put it. So if I think about traits, they're usually a creative entrepreneur of some kind. They make something in the world, could be writing, could be art, could be food, could be something like that. They usually have an audience-based business, which just means they have a large following somewhere online, social media, YouTube, email.
Yeah, so usually it's writer, podcaster, YouTuber, something like
exactly. That. And then what they sell may vary behind that, right? But like that's kind of their core audience growth channel is one of those things. They're usually doing at or above $1 million in revenue, at least my one-to-one people. I've got some group programs now I created so that other people could get access to me that are like low 6-figure, mid 6-figure businesses. Because one of my insights was basically that like the whole creator economy is oriented around the beginner. It's like getting people started, getting your first 1,000 fans. And what I've always loved is like, well, let's keep the people in motion. That is fun. It goes back to the resource thing. I know how to help you when you have resources. It's way harder when you don't have resources because sometimes it's just like you got to sit there and struggle for a while. So they've got resources. And generally speaking, if we flip over to the way of being side of things, most of them come to me at a point when, by any objective measure, they are fine. they have followers, they have income, they have a wealth base starting to be built, and nothing is fundamentally broken except for their experience of it, to go back to what we were just talking about. And all I need is a little tiny opening there. It doesn't have to be a big one. Because a lot of times what people come to me saying is, I want to grow from 1.5 million to 3 million in revenue. It's like, perfect. How's it going as you're building this business right now?
How do you feel today?
Exactly. As long as they have any amount of like, yeah, and also, but like, I'd like a little bit of margin in my day, or I'd like to write like I used to, or I'd really like not to continue making commitments that I really hate delivering on. As long as there's some kind of opening there, I know that we either will or we won't get to 3 million in revenue. But if we don't, it will be because you decided that didn't matter to you, not because we couldn't. So that's kind of the sweet spot right now. That may continue to develop. Like, I have a fascination and curiosity around what it might be like to work with a budding star in a professional sports league. An example of this would be, I think it's possible I might really be able to support a person like Scoot Henderson, who's in her second year point guard for the Trailblazers. He was highly touted coming out. He had a little bit of a rough go of it in his first year, was really struggling with the mental side of the game. I just have this sense that maybe there's an opening there for me.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Totally different context, but similar desire for peak performance.
Exactly. So I don't know. Maybe I'm putting that out there in the world just to see what comes of it, but I'm not attached to that at all.
All right, a couple questions to wrap up. So if I was going to make you teach a class for an hour, and I'm going to like give you 30 minutes to prep, what are you going to teach 30 minutes from now?
I think the most important thing I have available to me to teach are emotional and somatic awareness. And I think that I have earned the credibility because of what I have built at this point for people to give me a little bit of license to operate there that they might not otherwise give. Because I think while there are things that I say that might come across as woo-woo, quote unquote, it is grounded in an operational background and strategic mindset that I think allows people some trust to go there with me. And I think because of that, I am a unique delivery mechanism for some of the tools that I think can really widen people's self-awareness, to go back to that point, in a way that then comes back around eventually to performance. But it's through the lens of development versus just results. And so it'd probably be that same workshop that came out of the question you asked me, which is like, hey, let's look at the full richness of the emotional experience, or the psychology. I've started calling it the psychology of entrepreneurship because people like that more than like the emotional experience of entrepreneurship.
That's a good phrase.
So I would teach the psychology of entrepreneurship.
Last question. So 2 time frames, the last 5 years and the next 5 years. So last 5 years, what's the achievement you're most proud of? Next 5 years, what's the thing you're most excited to work on?
I mean, the last 5 years, the thing I'm most grateful for and proud of is just surrendering to what was in the stone. To go back to that Michelangelo quote, I think that I have fully stepped into and surrendered to all of my gifts, and also all of the support I have around me. I think I have progressively surrendered to what a gift the friendships I spent the last 2 decades building are to my life. And that has ripple effects for my children, for my wife, for my friendships, for my clients. So I think surrendering to myself and just removing the layers of cruft and just letting myself be, like letting myself breathe. My life feels so much more full of ease and joy today because of that. So I'm most proud of that. Concretely, the way that has played out is like, I earn more money now than I did as a COO of a $30 million startup. Like, that's pretty badass. Would I have guessed that 2 years ago? No, I was trying to get the bills paid, And so now I kind of feel like we're playing with house money. And it's like, oh yeah, baby, I know how to do this. And so now for the next 5 years, I'm thinking, how do I use all of this knowledge about my gifts and about surrendering to who I am I've called it coming out with arms open, like welcoming people into this. If I can create this umbrella of demand for this way of working, who else can come into this and accelerate the impact that we make? And I don't have to change much of anything other than just keep my arms open. And so I'm thinking a lot about 2 things right now. The first one is, there is writing that needs to come out of me. And I think it's in the form of memoir. If I had said that to myself 5 years ago, I would have said, you're going to write a memoir? That sounds stupid. But there's a memoir that needs to be written that I think can reach certainly hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions. I have no control over that part, but I think like the essential message of the thing I'm trying to say is universal. And I think it, especially at this time in the world, it needs to land with men. Like our generation of men is who I want to write for, but almost like through the lens of for the benefit of my kids, so that there's a generation of men ahead of them that they can really look to and learn from. So that's the book that needs to come out of me. And then secondly is I recently formed a new coaching commitment, which sounds a little woo-woo, but it is what it is. So the coaching commitment is I am a commitment to using my infinite loving power to build the organization I have always longed for. And what I've tapped into more than anything over these past 5 years is my capacity for both loving and being loved with others. And I've realized that like love is the most infinite resource in all the world. When I give you love in our friendship, it takes zero love away from anyone else. And it might even multiply, right? It might be the only infinitely renewable resource in the world. I think that's pretty cool, number one. And number two, all of this leadership perspective I've built has always been through the lens of what is the most holistic, kind, developmental organization that could possibly exist in the world. And there's something there. And I'm trying to find the right vessel for it, like business model vessel for it, so that I can unleash all of these gifts that I think I have on creating a wholesome culture where people show up to work really fulfilled every day. So those are the two things that I think are in store for the next 5.
Well, I will just say that I'm proud of you. You know, like it's been fun to be part of this and to see it for the last like 5 or 10 years. And yeah, there's been lots of different transition points, but I'm proud of you for the number of attempts, which for me, I would say that's like one of the big lessons that I take away is that, yeah, if you're willing to keep leaning against this process of becoming more self-aware, of trying to build the thing that you want to build, of trying to create the thing that you want to create, it may not be the first or second or third time that it happens. It may be the 7th time or the 9th time or whatever. But if you do spend enough time on it, like you will figure it out. And then I'm also proud of you for just kind of accepting what your strengths are, for the surrender piece of it that you mentioned. So it's been fun to watch your growth so far. And we both know it's only going to get better from here. And also I'm proud of you for asking me to take on the mic today, because this is fun. And now I'm going to do this round where like I just try to take over all of our friends' podcasts for one episode. It's fun. It's fun to host a show that I don't own. But thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Grateful for you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Good Work. I'm your host, Barrett Brooks, and this podcast is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. If you enjoyed this conversation with James, make sure to follow him on Instagram, X, LinkedIn, or anywhere else you are online. You can always find him at James Clear. And of course, make sure to check out his book, Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it yet, there's a reason it's sold over 20 million copies. And if you have read it, maybe it's a good time for a reread to refresh what you took away from it. As always, you can find the full show notes at goodworkshow.com, including links and resources we mentioned, plus summaries of every past episode, including this one. If this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you'll stick around. Hit follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you don't miss the next conversation. And if you're already a subscriber, number one, thank you so much. And number two, I would love it if you pass this episode along to just one friend who's been thinking deeply about their own story. Or maybe someone who might need permission to stop striving or maybe even suffering and to start becoming who they really are and settling in. I'll see you on the next episode.